Hey guys, Tim here. Got another DG teaching moment for you. We're still in the Old Testament, all right? And I'm going to tell you about a dude that you may have heard before. And this guy's name is Samson, all right? You can find Samson in the book of Judges, all right? And it's multiple chapters long, and so I'm gonna summarize it. We don't have time to read it today, but you do have time to read it this week before your driveway group. So I really encourage you to go to Judges chapter 13 through 16 and read about Samson and his crazy life. And so what we know about Samson is that he was called by God to help the Israelites from their oppressors, right? He was one of the judges. And he is given this incredible strength, and he's really just given, God made it pretty simple on this guy, just given a few rules to follow. And Samson was horrible about following these rules. He would immediately rebel. He was violent. He was angry. He was just really caught up in himself and didn't follow the rules. He was a rule breaker. He was the guy that would press the red button saying, don't press this, right? That was who he was to his core. And yeah, he just immediately breaks all the rules. But the cool thing about Samson is that God remains faithful to him throughout his whole story. God is just continually remains faithful to Samson, even at his lowest. And so the story of Samson is that even though he continues to break all the rules, he acts poorly, and he's just generally not the kind of guy that God would want in that scenario. If you thought about the characteristics of a leader that God would use, you wouldn't necessarily think about the way that Samson acts. But what we see here is God's faithfulness to remain and continue to lead him even at his lowest. And so Samson, he's got this beautiful wife, Delilah, who really turns on him, understands that his secret power is his hair. And yes, that sounds as crazy as it sounds crazy, right? But he's got this wife that cuts his hair and he loses his strength. But Samson at the end is taken to the temple to be executed, which is, again, this story is crazy, and I really encourage you to read it. Just Google Samson for a second. I don't know if you can see this by any means, but just think of the most ripped dude you know with luscious long hair, and that's Samson. And so he, at the end, spoiler alert, he just uses his crazy strength that God has given him and just pulling up the columns of the temple. Awesome story. But here's what we want to talk about truly at your driveway groups, is that Samson never really lived up to what he was supposed to be. He had all these gifts, all these talents, and even the supernatural talent that God gave him specifically, and yet he abused it. And what we need to understand is that we are very similar in that regard, is that Samson was violent and proud, and he, got betrayed, and he cried out to God at the end of his life. But what we can learn from Samson is that we shouldn't abuse the gifts that God has given us. And that's exactly what Samson did. And not only that, Samson's sin led to consequences, and so does our sin, right? God is gracious, and Jesus has forgiven all of our past, present, and future sins. But at the same time, in this world that we live in, sin still has consequences, right? And then even at our lowest, and even at Samson's lowest, God can still use him, and God can still use us. Even at our lowest, God can still use us. And that's the beauty of the story of Samson. So I encourage you to go read it, Judges 13 through 16, and then excited about y'all's conversations at your